Tell me a little bit about yourself, the work you do, and the story arc that led you to Marxist politics, especially considering there's a picture of you with Trudeau going around.
First of all, I was the one who dropped that picture of Trudeau on the timeline. So if anybody thinks that they're getting one over on me because they post a picture of me standing next to Justin Trudeau, before he was leader of the Liberal Party, by the way, and before he ran for prime minister, yeah, I was the one who put that on the fucking timeline. To roast myself for having once been a naive liberal who learned and understood and grew from his naive ass liberal position. I don't know what anybody thinks that they're doing, posting that picture of me like, oh, isn't this you? Yeah, it's me. I was the one that put that shit out there.
Yeah, so what happened? Like, can you tell me a little bit about what that evolution was like and what the journey? Walk me through a little bit about your life story.
Okay, I come from a Caribbean background. Like my family are from Jamaica. I don't know how much you know about Caribbean Canadians, but most of us are, at least those of us who are second generation Canadians, i.e., our parents immigrated here from Jamaica, especially that first wave that came in the 70s or the second wave that came in the 80s. They ended up in Canada because Pierre Elliott Trudeau, former Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau's father, allegedly, something is Castro, but Pierre Elliott Trudeau, I was going to say like reformed, but it was a complete overhaul almost. The immigration system. So the immigration system in Canada used to be highly exclusionary. And even though Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, the Bahamas, Antigua, etc., are former British colonies, they're part of the Commonwealth. So regardless of the fact that they're part of the Commonwealth, Canada was excluding people from those nations from immigrating to Canada. Trudeau's Immigration Reform Act opened the door for people who were more than simple domestic workers to immigrate to Canada en masse. And many of our parents and grandparents were among the first and second waves that came into Canada. So because of that, and they associate Trudeau, who is or was the leader of the Liberal Party, they associate him with the Immigration Act that allowed them to come to Canada in the first place. So many of us were born into liberal politics, and that's where I came from. If you're a Caribbean Canadian person or a Canadian of Caribbean background, you voted liberal. That's just what you did. And up until my mid 30s, that was generally the politics that I held. I mean, I was politically interested, but nowhere near as much as I am now. At the time I was working in the financial industry. I was doing what I thought that you're supposed to do as as like a younger Black man. You're supposed to, get your education, get yourself a good job, work your way up the career ladder. If you want to become politically involved, this is the party that you get involved with. And there was a series of events that just got me completely disillusioned with the Liberal Party of Canada. One of them was that the party sought out Bill Blair, the former Toronto chief of police, to be their candidate in Scarborough Rouge River. And Bill Blair, while he was chief of the Toronto Police Service, oversaw a program called carding, which, if you boil it down to logistics, is racial profiling with a paper trail. So if you're carded, what happens is that a police officer will approach you, ask you some questions, who are you? Where do you live? What are you doing in the area? Essentially just everything short of a stop and frisk, but just stop you and question you about who you are and what you're doing. And these become fishing expeditions for police to engage in racial profiling. And once you've given the police your information, that information ends up in a database that has zero oversight and very little transparency. So you may not even know that out of a conversation that you had with a police officer who approached you for no discernible reason, they don't necessarily have to have a reason to do so. But out of that conversation, you could end up in a police database and being racially profiled. How does that play out in practicality? Well, somebody that I know that was working at Pearson Airport, near Pearson International Airport, due to the fact that she lived in an area that was, low income and higher crime, And because she's part of a community that's very tight knit, she's part of the Somali community in Etobicoke, Ontario, which is a suburb of Toronto. There were people that she knew in the neighborhood, was associated with, socialized with, and so forth. But you're from a very small and tight knit community, so what else are you going to do? She ended up getting her security clearance at the airport revoked because of police having profiled her father and having profiled people in the community. And they essentially built a sort of like a network of associations, almost like a bureaucratic fingerprint, to put her at a higher risk of possibly helping somebody smuggle drugs, possibly helping somebody commit an act of terrorism or commit some other act of crime, because people in the neighborhood had been profiled through this carding system. She ends up getting her security clearance revoked and losing her job. So that was a bridge too far for me. The idea that you're going to pander to the votes of Black Canadians, and yet somebody who was making life difficult, if not just straight up immiserating the lives of hundreds, if not thousands of people in the city of Toronto, you're going to seek that person out to not only be your candidate in a riding that is like a district, what you would call it, but a riding that has a high percentage of people of color, but also put this person in charge or have them oversee the process of legalizing marijuana. And what happens post-election? Bill Blair essentially puts together a panel of his closest friends and cronies, even people like the former chief of police, Julian Fantino, who, while he was chief of police, had gone out and arrested swaths of Black and brown and Indigenous people behind marijuana offenses. Well, he goes and opens up his own marijuana-based business. Everybody gets in on the act. You know, the deputy chief of police under Bill Blair, he gets in on the act. Other people that have close associations with law enforcement, they get in on the act. So when the 2015 election happened, which is the election that Justin Trudeau became prime minister, I wrote an article for the National Post, which is a conservative newspaper in Canada, and I said that Black Canadians should not vote for Justin Trudeau. The idea that he would not only seek out somebody who's done so much damage to the Black community, but also have no promises, have no conversations about racial profiling, about police brutality, or any of that in the lead up to the election, tells me that you're coasting off of your father's success, but have no plans to implement your own solutions, bridge any gaps, pull down any systemic barriers. That was like what got me down the path of moving towards other forms of politics. The other part is that I had a very hard time reconciling what I was doing for a living, that is working in the financial sector, with what it was that I was seeing around me. So working in the financial sector, and I was working in like the mutual funds and segregated funds industry. In the 2008 financial crisis, I remember my colleagues blaming the collapse of the US financial system on affirmative action for banking. That is, banks were forced to give minorities loans. That was kind of what got me down the path of maybe this just isn't the right career for me. But by that time, I was already entrenched in the business. I'd already put years towards working in the business. I'd gotten my education and everything. By the time we get around, 2014, 2015, I was pretty much at the end of my rope. I was like, there's just no way that I'm going to be able to change any sort of system from the inside. And frankly, I'm getting sick of the fact that we believe in the system that we call capitalism. We believe that it can be reformed, that it can be fixed or changed. And every attempt at having done so has been sabotaged. And even where it has been successful, it doesn't produce the intended effect. So there's, for example, the Consumer Protection Bureau in the United States, which is supposed to stop predatory organizations, Wells Fargo, Citibank, Bank of America, et cetera, from offering discriminatory and predatory lending practices. But the Financial Protection Bureau was completely defanged by a couple of senators in the US that went on to become lobbyists. So that to me just indicated there's something wrong with this particular ideology. And how is it that much of what I was learning growing up about Black radical politics, which was taught to me, by my mother and by a special school that I had to go to on Saturday mornings, that taught me about Black history, about African history, about Caribbean history, about resistance to white supremacy, et cetera. how is it that I can reconcile these things that I've learned about the history of Black radical politics with what I'm doing in life and what the sort of politics that people from my background generally participate in? And the fact that it was irreconcilable. It was a contradiction, and it moved me down the path of, I would say, being shy about it and calling myself a Pan-African socialist, because I at that point I was convinced that socialism as a social arrangement was the most equitable and just social arrangement that we could conceivably imagine in our lifetimes or realize in our lifetimes. But I also became extremely dissatisfied with what it is that counts as socialism. Is socialism Bernie Sanders socialism, two-state solution socialism, Zionism socialism? Is it plundering countries in the global south for their natural resources to develop this Green New Deal strategy? Or if it's silicon production, or if it's coltan production, if it's lithium production, is that what we mean by socialism? Or does socialism mean standing in solidarity with these global South nations against imperialist powers? And that's what landed me squarely in the lap of communism, because here are all of the things that I've learned and understood and believed deep down, and yet the only way to actually realize it, the only feasible path that I see to realizing the possibility of bringing down the imperial core and the eventual dissolution of the capitalist mode of production is in communism. So I know that's a long ass answer, but that's how I got there.
No, I think that like you basically, I don't know if you've ever directly, laid out your life story like that, but I feel like you kind of summarized and condensed it like pretty neatly. And you kind of like easily set up my next question, basically, which I was gonna refer to our conversation on the Snowpiercer podcast. But I think I can just ask you directly. I understand that like there is a lot of autodidacticism where you're involved. Like you kind of like read a lot by yourself. You're self-educated as a Marxist, communist, Pan-Africanist, I imagine. Like, or you didn't go to school for it.
I mean, were you gonna go to school to learn communism in
I know,
America?
right?
Yeah, no. It was being pointed in the right direction by people who were very patient with me to explain a lot of these concepts. But it was also avoiding YouTube as a source of information or as a source of edification, and just going right to the source materials. I have ADHD, right? I have a very hard time sitting and reading any particular thing for any length of time. But it's also, I would say, like counterbalanced by a curiosity. Like if there's a question that I can't answer, I will be relentless until I either get an answer or figure out why it can't be answered. Like why it is that we're at a deadlock as to that question. And I think that many of the contradictions that I was encountering in like my beliefs as somebody who is, for somebody who says that he's anti-racist, somebody who is, anti-bigotry in whatever form, how is it that I can accomplish these? How is it I can accomplish these ultimate end goals while at the same time supporting a system that is invariably going to produce these outcomes? It's too much of a contradiction for me. So I'm like, okay, so what other ideologies or social arrangements have been practiced that seek to bring about the end of racism, homophobia, misogyny, transphobia, etc.? And in theory, not necessarily in practice all the time, but in theory, the idea would be that socialism would account for all of these contradictions. It doesn't make sense that a nation, a revolutionary nation, would exclude people that can contribute to that revolutionary nation on the basis of their identity, whether it's gender identity, racial identity, or anything of that nature. It doesn't make any sense. You're basically hobbling your form of production. You've taken away from what it is that you've taken away from the nation's potential by excluding people from both from production and ownership. Whereas with capitalism, it is custom built for that, because not everybody can own. So how do you start winnowing down the number of people and the type of people that can qualify to become part of the ruling class? And B, how do you turn the working classes against one another? It's just designed to produce those outcomes. So this idea that we could produce a reformed type of capitalism, I having worked in an industry that is at the heart of capitalism, like capitalism essentially thrives right now on financialization. And working in the heart of that industry, you understand that there's just no way that these contradictions can be reconciled. So that's what led me to read a lot of books. I didn't start with Marx or Lenin. I started with Black radical authors, or at least the ones that I've been introduced to. So I started with Marcus Garvey, who was not a socialist, by the way, but is somebody who is a fierce Black nationalist and was looking for a form of empowerment and mode of production that would enable people of African descent from the African diaspora to develop a form of self-determination. I read W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a fierce enemy of Marcus Garvey in their early years, but later came to understand that Marcus Garvey was correct about a lot of things. I read and listened to Kwame Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael. I got into Black radical politics. I got into the writings of Huey P. Newton. I got into some other areas too. I read George Jackson, Robert F. Williams. Robert F. Williams isn't necessarily a socialist, but has, fierce revolutionary ideas. I went down that path before I encountered Marx, Lenin, but also Bakunin, Kropotkin, etc. Like I read as widely as I could, and I guess the ideas that resonated the most with me, and I guess were ideas and ideologies that I saw as being conceivable, if not realizable, within my lifetime, just happened to be mostly of the Marxist-Leninist persuasion.
Is that all like between 2015 and now, like that you're describing, or like was this a longer process than that?
I had read Garvey, I had read Du Bois previously, but I hadn't read Huey P. Newton before 2015. I'd read Kwame Nkrumah way back when I was a child, but I hadn't read Julius Nyerere, right? So it was fleshing out what little I already knew. And I mean, years down the road, like I realize I know very little, which is why if you see me posting stuff, like you'll see me posting screen caps of what I've read, not because I'm necessarily just trying to show people how smart I am, which I understand it can come across that way, but it's because I'm saying this is where I got this information from. And if I'm wrong about the way that I've interpreted it, feel free to let me know. I'm completely open to other ideas, but this is what I've gotten from this piece of information.
A large part of your journalistic work, especially because I definitely don't see a lot of like the Marxism and communism being explicitly, stated, and definitely your beliefs, I don't think I see on the website also very clearly. So I feel like you're putting a front in a sort of way. You're keeping it like kind of covert. I'll have you clarify that. But before that, I also wanted to invoke the Snowpiercer thing and say that like over there you kind of mentioned that Bong Joon-ho you see as a figure of like who's actually infiltrating the mainstream and bringing like Marxist politics to the mainstream, class analysis, etc. How do you see your own work as a sort of like infiltration in that sort of way? Or
I would never compare myself to Bong Joon-ho.
No, of course not. But like in your own way, I mean, like you did say that you wrote for the National Post, and like I have read who's the Quillette editor, like John Kay or something that you were referring to in your one of your cultural appropriation articles or something like that. I think you were mentioning something that this dude wrote. I mean, like authors like John Kay appear in the National Post, and like I also saw some new article that you wrote for the Globe and the Mail where you were taking a more like a sort of libertarian stance on the vaccine, which you're getting.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a libertarian stance, and not on the vaccine, but on vaccine passports. And that actually surprises me that it really surprises me that people who call themselves socialists, and that's not me doubting people's bona fides. When I say that they call themselves socialists, it's like, well, this is what you publicly identify as, yet I don't see the exercise in dialectical materialism or in historical materialism to come to your conclusion. It seems like a knee-jerk reflex, when what I thought was that as a socialist, it's incumbent upon you to filter the information you're given through historical materialism, through dialectical materialism, and come to a conclusion. Now, we can disagree on the conclusions, but most of the conclusions that I end up seeing on the vaccine passports especially are reflexive of their knee-jerk reactions. So when I explain to somebody that the people who are going to be most hurt by vaccine passports are the people that are already marginalized. So what you're imagining with the vaccine passport, and just to explain what that is a system by which if you want to go to a restaurant, if you want to go to a gym, if you want to go to a sports stadium or any other public place where there you would expect a number of people to congregate, as long as it's not essential, so not grocery stores, not pharmacies, etc., but places that you go for recreation, leisure, etc., that in order to enter, you have to have produced proof that you've been vaccinated. And the proof comes in the form of an app that you download to your phone, and the app will present a QR code. And when you scan the QR code on the reader owned by the business that you're attempting to gain entry to, it will determine whether or not you've been vaccinated. So it will give the information, this is your name, this is your vaccination status, and having passed that test, then you gain entry. The problem with that is that you imagine that it's punishing the anti-vaxxers. The people who refuse to get vaccinated are the ones who will be screened out of public places. So you can rest easy that when you go to your basketball game, or you go to the gym, or you sit down at a restaurant, or you go to a wedding, that the people who are picketing in front of hospitals and coughing on the nurses and spitting on them as they're going in, they're not going to be in the same venue as you. And I understand that impulse, because you don't want to be in the same place as them, because they're possibly carrying a potentially deadly disease. The problem with that is that in many places, including British Columbia and Manitoba, there are no allowances for people who are medically ineligible to be vaccinated, meaning that if you have a disability or some sort of a medical condition that stops you from getting vaccinated, like your doctor simply will not vaccinate you, then you're also barred from participating in public life. Well, if you're medically ineligible to get vaccinated, why would you want to go to a basketball game, or why would you want to go to a restaurant, or what? Okay, you could say that, why would somebody who's possibly immunocompromised or medically ineligible want to go to those places? I don't know, maybe your sister's getting married and your whole family will be there, except a 10-year-old can go to the wedding, a 66-year-old can go to the wedding, but you can't go to the wedding. Why? Right? Like it doesn't make any sense to me. Let's take this a step further. So let's say that you are medically ineligible to get the vaccine. You're a homeless person. It's the winter time in Toronto, where in a typical year, we'll see somewhere between 75 and 90 people freeze to death outdoors. Somebody walks down the street, and by the way, since you're no longer able to encamp, you're no longer able to pitch a tent and live in a park because the police have torn down the park encampments, you're out in the street freezing. And somebody hands you a 5-note and says, go get yourself a coffee. Well, guess what? You can't get into the fucking coffee shop because you need a vaccine passport to get in, right? So it's not just the anti-vaxxers. It's also people who are disabled, the marginalized, the poor, people who are undocumented, who might be afraid that if they show up to a vaccine clinic, that they will have the immigration authorities called on them. Even if you can get past those barriers, those psychological and those medical barriers, there's also the fact that if you are undocumented in Canada and you want to make a vaccine appointment, let's say that you're in Ontario, if you want to make a vaccine appointment, you have to produce your health card number in order to make that appointment, because it's done online. And one of the questions, which is mandatory, is what is your health card number? Well, if you can't produce the health card number, you can't book the appointment. So you have to call your local health clinic in order to get the appointment. But if you're out panhandling during those prime hours when the health clinic is open, then when exactly are you supposed to make that phone call? Or if you don't even own a cell phone, how exactly are you supposed to do that? So there's systemic barriers in the way of getting everybody vaccinated. Like until they start like going door to door or driving around neighborhoods in like mobile vaccination clinics, what you encounter is people that are at the highest risk of being essentially structurally screened out from getting the vaccine. Those are the people upon which this new policy falls the hardest. Not necessarily the anti-vaxxers. The anti-vaxxers in Canada make up 8% of the total population. So 8% of the entire population should dictate how we punish the 25% of people that have not gotten one dose of the vaccine. And the same thing in the United States, 14% of Americans are anti-vaxxers, but 1/3 of Americans have not been vaccinated yet. Some are vaccine hesitant, some are medically ineligible. So 67% of Americans have been vaccinated with at least one dose. 33% of Americans have not been vaccinated with one dose. Of that amount, the majority of them are either vaccine hesitant or medically ineligible, but the smaller percentage, the 14%, are anti-vaxxers. So in order to punish that 14%, that minority of people, or in Canada, to punish that 8%, the single digit percentage of people that refuse to get the vaccine, you're willing to harm either the 25% in Canada or the 33% in the United States. You're willing to harm all of those people just so you can punish that 14%. So you tell me, how is that in any way socialist? Like, how is that, if you believe that you're standing in class solidarity with the working class, with the poor, the marginalized, the racialized, etc., and yet you're willing to punish them in order to get to the people who don't even fucking care, by the way, but you want to get to those anti-vaxxers by cutting a swath through all of the people who aren't anti-vaxxers and face structural barriers, which we knew existed before this the pandemic hit. I don't understand what is socialist about that.
I am vaccinated, both shots, and I kind of like did not even hesitate to go and get it because like, you know, I was raised in that kind of a setting, and also I was also paranoid. So on the other side, like, and I don't have health insurance, so if I get sick, then I'm fucked. So I went and did that. But I would say that, like, in all of this conversation about, like, you know, the culture war that has been concocted using this issue, as you're saying, involving the anti-vaxxers, etc., there isn't like a lot of talk of class or internationalist solidarity, because not a lot of countries have actually even access to the vaccines, and somehow like socialists are not really emphasizing that, as opposed to, you know, being concerned about like the people who in the first world countries, like as a sort of wedge issue between two different communities or whatever. Like in all of this, I find it fascinating that solidarity has gone out. But I also want to like kind of give you a sort of to come back to the point of what do you feel about your own work? As do you see that as like infiltration? Do you see that as like
no, I mean, like when I started writing columns, I wasn't a socialist. I was probably what you might call like a progressive liberal. And, you know, I gradually, I guess I gradually felt myself like being compelled to, I wouldn't even say move farther left. It's more like I felt compelled to reconcile my deeply held beliefs with an actual political ideology, right? Like it's a complete mismatch. If I believe in anti-imperialism, like if I believe that NATO countries should stop exploiting the global South, if I believe that we should stamp out racism, if I believe that we should stamp out homophobia, transphobia, if I actually believe those things, then how can I at the same time believe in an ideology that guarantees those outcomes? I guess I felt myself like reconciling my deeply held beliefs with an actual like political impetus. And it was never intended for me to sort of like get into the system and, you know, take it down from within or anything that lofty or noble. Was nothing like that. I just developed a keener political insight as I was writing columns. And that's actually what makes it a lot harder for me to write. Like you'll notice that like as I became more and more communist-y, my writing production fell off. And part of the reason for that is I have it's hard for me to imagine that what I'm writing is making an actual difference out there in the world when there's just like so much else that needs to be done. Right. So it's like there's political organizing and there's like, you know, like local stuff that I can be doing outside of writing. And I feel myself compelled to do that. But at the same time, you know, I do have the ability to reach a lot of people. So therefore, I should be using the platform I have to try to filter some of these political and cultural issues through a dialectical lens is what I really try to do. And I really need to get back on that track and stop using all of my time and energy to try and convince people online. I'm not going to be one of those people who's like, oh, if you're tweeting, it's fake activism. I don't believe that. I think that participating on social media can be forms of activism. You can certainly mobilize a lot of people, and you can help change minds. A lot of people who have joined the Communist Party of Canada have said that they were compelled to fill out the membership because they see my tweets and I change their mind or open their mind to a lot of things. So I think that there is some good that comes out of it, but I don't think we're at a point now where we can wait for these gradual changes to take root. I think it's incumbent on people who really do believe in a dictatorship of the proletariat, who really do believe in some of the fundamental aspects of socialism, to accelerate that. Like we definitely have to pick up the pace because we don't have a lot of time.
You kind of like answered my next question right there, because I was actually going to ask you, but I guess like there's some merit in asking still, that like a lot of, especially electoral politics or like reform-based politics in the West is based on optics, which is like a very sweet word for like to mean nothing at all.
Aesthetics,
but given how, and here's a kind of head scratcher, because like given how like people like Obama or Trudeau essentially said nothing and got elected and were able to be successful, is there any kind of merit at all? And this is like kind of setting up for our conversation about what happened at the Met Gala, which is it revolutionary at all to be engaged in the game of optics?
I do believe that politics lives downstream from culture. I don't think that there's any doubting. I don't think you can actually doubt that. I think that anybody who dismisses the idea that culture leads politics need only look at their social media feed, pick up a newspaper. Everything that you read is a side effect of culture, right? Like the idea, for example, that last year there were uprisings happening all across America. There were PlayStations that were being burnt down. There were marches in the streets. There were like car dealerships being broken into and expensive cars being driven into the streets by people that had just like gotten fed up with this whole system. And then a year later, cities and states across America are banning the teaching of critical race theory. So you have like the largest proletarian uprising in American history that is led primarily by Black people and by people of color. And a year later, the thought process that leads them to understand that America has a system whereby people are bound to the law but not protected by it, and other people are protected to the law but not bound to it. The system that helps them understand how that is created in the first place. Those circumstances are created in the first place. You banning the teaching of it in schools, which, by the way, was never fucking taught in high school in the first place. I don't know. I mean, I went to high school a very long time ago, but I don't remember hearing anything about critical race theory, even though it predates me by decades. So it's obviously a cultural reaction. That is, there's a lot of white people who were able to hijack the conversation about everything from abolishing the police to bringing about an end to capitalism. They moved it from abolish the police to defund the police. They moved it from, eat the rich or guillotine the rich, or in more practical terms, eliminate billionaires, eliminate wealth disparities, to tax the rich. And all of this comes about because there's a cultural cross-current that is attempting to reconcile radical politics with capitalist interests. So when you see somebody wearing a dress, a designer-made dress, a custom designer-made dress, made by an up-and-coming millionaire designer, to the Met Gala of all places, which, by the way, a ticket to the Met Gala about a decade ago was $25,000, and then a few years ago, they upped the price to $30,000, and now it's $35,000 to keep more people out. They wanted to essentially like keep the riffraff out of the Met Gala, so they kept on increasing the ticket prices so that people who might be able to afford a $25,000 ticket could not afford a $35,000 ticket. So you're going to go into this event, which is attended by the cultural elite across America. You're going to go there with this tax the rich message, and it's somehow subversive or taking a message to them that they're not willing to hear. Well, if the message was so threatening to them, you wouldn't fucking be there in the first place, right? Like nobody would have, not like never mind buying a ticket, because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did not buy her ticket to the Met Gala. She was invited to the Met Gala. But if they didn't want her there, or if they thought the message was so dangerous, she wouldn't fucking be there. What it does is allow them to appear wounded somehow, that people who saw this message were, I don't know, maybe they felt like they were under a threat, or that the villagers were coming to burn their houses down, or I don't even know what. When right outside, there was a Black Lives Matter protest happening outside the Met Gala. People were, I mean, just ground into paste by the police on the pavement outdoors. They were beaten, they were handcuffed, they were laid on face down. And rather than supporting the protest or being out at the protest, do I think that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez needs to be like a frontline marcher at this kind of a protest? No. Do I think that any of these people who were carrying or shouting Black Lives Matter slogans last year need to be getting their skulls cracked open by police? No, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying, though, is that if they had been present, you probably would have seen a much less violent police response. So rather than going where they're needed to support the people that most need it, they're going to attend this, rich people's ball that happens every fucking year and accomplish nothing. Right. So I was annoyed beyond belief, not just at the tax the rich dress and at her attending the gala in the first place, which, I mean, she can do whatever she wants. It annoyed me, but what actually made me angry, like what actually made me upset, was the sheer amount of people that were just jumping to her. It's like, she's one of the most powerful people, not just in America, but in the entire world. She doesn't need your fucking help. Why are you, as somebody who calls herself a socialist, why are you coming to her defense? If you see that somebody else who's coming at it with a principled socialist critique, and I'm not just talking about me, forget me, talking about everybody else that had a problem with this, why are you then calling them, they're just like LARPers and they're faking it and they're just like leftier than now and this, that, and the third? What you're doing is you are undermining other people's political principles. You're casting, like, you're basically like jacketing them in having fake politics, because you're so enamored with the politician that you believe has a shot at maybe becoming a House Speaker one day, maybe becoming president one day, and maybe she'll like bestow upon you the same favor that Barack Obama bestowed upon his supporters, which was absolutely fucking nothing, by the way. But you're going to be bestie with the possible next president of the United States. She's the one that's going to like swoop down and save us all from this capitalist nightmare. So you, as a socialist, are going to go and defend her against all of the other socialists who said, this is fucking ridiculous. This is rich people partying with rich people with a meaningless slogan that isn't even socialist in nature. You're gonna do that rather than standing next to the people that you ought to be considering your comrades and saying, yeah, this is just not good enough.
I think you are like perfectly valid in like pointing out the fact that her response to this is to kind of double down almost and like play on almost like, I mean, an elite.
But she's been doing this. She's been doing this forever. She's been doing this forever. What she always does is either get out of her depth on a particular policy issue or on a political position, or do something that is just completely for show, just vapid and harebrained, and then double down on it by saying, oh, the haters are saying this, or people are attacking me for that. And oftentimes alluding to the fact that it's the fact that she's a woman in politics, or a woman in color in politics, and reverting to that pop ed poll stance, or that standpoint type of defense, is only going to carry you so far, because it might protect you against your detractors to the left. The people on the right don't fucking care. Right. So what it does is keep the people on the left flank attacking each other, whereas the people on the right are just going to say whatever they want about you anyway. So rather than, I don't know, like I get, as a relatively new politician and somebody who enjoys a lot of popularity, you want to be part of the cool kids club. I get the allure of all that. I understand that. Like you want to be, especially like if you're a congressperson from New York City, like you want to be a part of New York life. You're a telegenic person. You're smart enough to articulate policy positions that resonate with a lot of people that might not have been acceptable even 10 years ago. And there's a temptation to want to carry that message to the elite who need to hear it. But the way that you do that isn't by attending their events and sipping champagne and clinking glasses with them. The way that you do it is by letting them know, yeah, you're not my friends. You're not the friends of the people. You are making this problem worse. You know, the problem of insustainability with regard to like environmental policy, the problem of unsustainability where it comes to agriculture, food policy, that is like food scarcity is a real thing in America and the rich are making it worse. Income inequality and all of these other issues are the fault of the fucking people who are in the room. And it's not that they need to be taxed, it's that they need to be eliminated. They need to not exist. Their businesses don't need to be taxed more. Their businesses need to be nationalized. Their mansions don't need to be taxed at an equitable rate or the capital gains taxed as income. It's that all of this should be seized and redistributed because there's absolutely no reason why they should have so much and everyone should have so little. That is a socialist message. Tax the rich has been a message. I think
Dwight Eisenhower had that.
It's a fucking like Eugene V. Debs was saying this shit in the early 1900s. Why is this brand new to anybody? And if we're talking about our generation, this is an Occupy message. The contravening interest between the 99% and the 1%, they need to tax people more. The fact that rich and powerful people enjoy an outsized representation in our form of politics, yeah, that's over 10 years old, at least from our generation's standpoint. So why the fuck do you believe that her going into the Met Gala, of all places, with this message scrawled on a dress is going to change anybody's mind? The same people that were looking out their Wall Street windows and laughing at protesters as they got pepper sprayed and their asses beat by police in Zuccotti Park, it's the same fucking people in that building. They don't care. And again, it's not so much her, because again, I get the temptation, and she's a member of Congress. She's a member of a bourgeois party within a bourgeois state. What really pissed me off was the amount of people that were willing to simply throw aside their principles that they say they have and just be like, oh yeah, you go bestie. I don't know. It to me told me social media is just not the place for you because these people aren't serious.
Can there be Marxists at the Met Gala?
I mean,
if so, under what circumstances?
I was gonna say, like, if you're at the Met Gala, because you're engaging in a protest, like you've stormed the doors, sure. if you have been invited to sit at the Met Gala as a Marxist, it should actually be a red flag to you. It should concern you highly. It should be very alarming. If they feel comfortable enough to invite you to sit down and break bread with them, there's something you're doing wrong because you're not a threat.
Marxists online, many pointed out that AOC's statement about even at the Met Gala, like aside from the dress, even the statement that she made was about bringing the working class to the table and not to seize and redistribute, as you were pointing out. Now, my question is,
who are the working class being brought to the table?
No, my question is like,
no, I would like to know. I would like to know just before you who. Okay, if she's talking about her, she's not working class because she's a member of Congress. As a politician, you are not a working. Okay, because you are in a bourgeois state responsible for crafting policy that the state implements, you are by definition not a member of the working class, right? You are petty bourgeois at best, if not a member of the bourgeois. You are not working class because you are an accomplice to the ruling class. If she's talking about Aurora James, she's not a member of the working class because Aurora James owns a multi-million-dollar fashion company. She cannot be a part of the working class because she owns the means of production. So who the fuck is she talking about that's a member of the working class that's at the Met Gala?
I completely resonate with that view. And I think I also see her as like, and she's like a self-admitted social democrat. I don't think she even calls herself like a full-fledged. So I mean, like she uses that.
I mean, she was the same person that believes that socialism is compatible with capitalism, which should just fucking disqualify her in any sort of serious conversation. But sure.
And in that, like my question becomes like, what is? I understand the caricature portrayals, like the cartoonish portrayals on the right wing, but like what makes leftists in the United States like project, whether it's on Bernie or her, like far more radical politics than they themselves like admit to having?
Because they want other people to believe that their intentions are to stealthily carry those radical politics into the halls of power. And when they have power, suddenly throw off their disguise, their bourgeois or ruling class or capitalist disguise, like throw off the cape and be like, aha, we were socialist the entire time. And now we got you. And it's like, this is a fantasy. This is the Hunger Games. This is like, it's fantasy in a high dudgeon for people who haven't grown up and don't talk to people outside of not just their social circle, but outside of their state. Like, this is not how socialist either revolution or reform, like large scale reform, has been done outside of the United States. In countries that are moving towards socialism, take, for example, Bolivia, right? So no violent revolution necessary. There was an election of Evo Morales, and his party is called Movimiento a Socialismo. It's movement towards socialism.
Mm-hmm.
The idea wasn't to join a bourgeois party and exercise that form of entryism to steer this barge towards socialism as slowly as a barge can move in any direction. The idea was to start building solidarity among the rural cocoa farmers, the campesinos, to work among the urban marginalized, to work among the working class broadly, bring a coalition of people together, indigenous people, mestizos, everybody under a single banner, that we are going to move this country from a former military dictatorship towards a strong working class based economy and social organization where the people own the means of production, which means nationalizing the forms of production that were formerly extractivist forms of production controlled by outside corporate entities. That's how it was done in Bolivia. That's how it was done. I'm gonna hesitate before I say that's how it was done in any other state, because I know that as soon as I say fucking China or Mozambique or anywhere else, you're probably gonna get a million people like spamming your Twitter account with why this isn't true of China or any of these other states.
Now you can go ahead.
But what I'm going to say, like in any of these other states, Venezuela, China, Mozambique, Angola, wherever, the idea is either A, a massive revolution, or B, an electoral overhaul that comes from socialist parties, not from people that are trying to use like one or two candidates within a bourgeois party to stage a takeover of that party. It didn't work in the UK. It has multiple times failed in America. It's never going to work in Canada. You need to build socialist power from outside of the duopoly.
Flip side to this is the fact that there's a justification in the United States, at least, which is that like there is really no, I mean, like you've been one of the people who have pointed out very many times that like the amount of like kind of personal enrichment that goes on even in a movement like Black Lives Matter, a movement for Black lives, where like there's an industrial complex there as well. So given all of that, and given the realities of the United States, and the fact that there isn't really a political kind of movement, so to say, that is active, that operates at the scale that a lot of people seem to be able to be invested in, and therefore like they just like totally seem to be all in on this one figure who is basically leading from a very individualistic, like personal brand building standpoint.
Hey, you think of the history of America, though, right? Think of about how American history is taught. American history is like great man history. It's entirely wrapped around great man theory, that there are founding fathers who gifted upon the current generation a brilliant idea for liberation and freedom and this, that, and the third. Just a bunch of really smart guys sat around a table and hammered out a policy that would eventually become the world's longest continuous democracy, or whatever the fuck they say, right? Keeping in mind that America, I mean, I have my reservations as to whether we even to call it a democracy now, but it couldn't even qualify as to being a democracy, like a full-fledged democracy, until the Civil Rights Act was passed. If you have what's called a quote unquote democracy, but you're excluding a swath of the population for participating in it as anything other than slaves or second class citizens, then it's not a democracy. But this idea that slaveholders sat around a table and developed this amazing idea that was just destined to become the world's most dominant hegemonic power, that there are individuals throughout American history that have changed the trajectory of the country. Whether you believe it was James Monroe, whether you believe it was Abraham Lincoln, whether you believe it was FDR, whether you believe it was Martin Luther King, but the trajectory of America goes along one path, and then along comes a great person that knocks the country off the path that it's on and sets it on another trajectory. That is how American history is taught to people. That is just not how it fucking works. The way that it works is that there were political movements and there are political cross currents, and there's co-optation, and there's sabotage, there's bloodshed, there's violence. And out of that comes a settlement between the ruling class and the subordinated class, that this is how we're going to maintain it in equilibrium. Us as the subordinated class are willing to sacrifice a certain percentage of our population as long as we get to share in the spoils, and that protects you from being dragged out of your homes and burned at the stake. That the history of America is a history of compromise between the petty bourgeois and the ruling class, to the expense of the working class, who are sold on this idea because of the promise that they may one day join the ranks of the petty bourgeois. That is pretty much the entirety of American history. So why is it that, this conquering hero myth continues to persist in American politics? Because that is American history. That's also the way that we think of when we talk about like Judeo-Christian history. I still don't know what the fuck that means, but whenever we think of, I think what they're trying to do is reconcile the Old Testament with the New Testament when they say that, because they understand that the Old Testament, there was no Christ. But this idea that great men and women to some extent, I mean, if Esther exists, there's Judith and Holofernes, there are great women in the Old Testament as well, but there are great people in the Bible that changed the trajectory of Christian history. And I think it is like, American history is so tightly wound with this Protestant idea of an elect that, when I say the elect, I mean that there are certain people who are just predestined to get into heaven, and sucks to be the rest of you, but there's just not enough room. I think that has an incredible pull and sway over people's perception of how politics is done, that they transpose this idea of a Protestant work ethic into places where the Protestant work ethic is supposed to be anathema, i.e. dialectical materialism. They simply can't get rid of their old habits. And that's why you see this like projection onto politicians that they consider their heroes, their leaders, or whoever. That is why they do this, because they can't break themselves out of this mode of thinking that they've been indoctrinated in since before birth.
There's really no form of like collectivizing or like an imagination for a collectivizing beyond like rallying around an individual in an electoral sense, like as it happened with Bernie Sanders. Right. But even from the standpoint of like, let's to come all the way back to the Met Gala again, like even from the standpoint of like it being subversive, like you said, even for that great person, the kind of history maker to actually make history at that point, it would have been pretty phenomenal if there was like a Met Gala attendee who actually wore the dress and stood outside and protested, which would actually be kind of like a fun thing to have done.
Yeah, I mean, if she had taken constituents to go outside the Met Gala with like tax the rich signs, and even if she wore the tax the rich dress outside the Met Gala, I mean, to me it would have been spectacle, but I would have been like, all right, well, whatever. It is what it is. That's the best that we can expect out of politics. But the fact that she was indoors and It's just like you wanted to be there. You wanted to you wanted to be at the fucking Met Gala. Like don't try to dress it up in politics or whatever. You just wanted to go. Like, and that's fine. Yeah, like there's I'm not gonna name a name because I consider this person I'm friendly with this person, but there was still okay. So do you remember Oscars So White a while back?
Yeah. Chris
Okay.
Rock hosted the Oscars that year.
Well, I mean, Oscars So White went a ways back farther than that. I remember, I think it was like 2015 or 16 that 2015, I'm pretty sure.
I think
Oscars.
that was the year that Chris
Where
Rock hosted the Oscars.
oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know because I hardly ever watched
Go
this
ahead.
shit.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, but a Twitter user started the hashtag Oscars So White because of the prevalence of white filmmakers, cast and crew, etc. That were being presented with Oscars. Right now, it sparked a national conversation. It caused nonprofits to open up like they just sprouted everywhere like mushrooms in the summertime. And there I think there was some forward progress on having a more diverse Hollywood. Some, I mean, there's not much you can really expect. But then the person who started the hashtag attended the Oscars. And it's like, like far be it from me to judge anyone's choices, but if the idea is that you're calling out this institution that has for a very long time shut out Black people and people of color in terms of like recognition for what they've contributed to the industry, and they invite you to the Oscars and you go, and then we never see an Oscars So White hashtag ever again. Just like, don't come up with a litany of reasons as to why being there was the right thing to do. Just say you wanted to fucking go, right? Just like Micah White, who was one of the organizers of Occupy Wall Street, goes to the Davos conference in Switzerland. These people are... You write a whole fucking book explaining why it is that you have to take the argument to people within the halls of power. You just wanted to go to the Davos conference. You don't have to dress it up behind like this warping of your own politics. Just say you wanted to go, and that'd be fine. But then don't do that and then try to make it political at the same time, because nobody fucking believes you. And the people who do, I'm sorry, but they're useless. Like they don't have grounded principles. They don't have a theory of change. Whatever theory of change exists to them is basically having a carrot dangled in front of them forever that they will chase into eternity right off of a cliff. And I don't know. I mean, if your fans are for it, do it for your fans. But people who actually have stakes in the outcome are not going to take you seriously. And I can't take that shit seriously.
I have one last question for you, but I also wanted to say one thing, which is I was going to just finish that thought. Considering that the Democrats are the roadblock to, the tax the rich itself is supposed to be like a nod to some policy that she's drafting, etc. So since the Democrats and especially Joe Manchin is the roadblock for like a lot of things from passing.
Joe Manchin is not a roadblock for anything.
Yeah, right. Like,
Joe Manchin. They've been doing this since 1994. When the House Democrats sent a bill to the Senate, a bill that they compromised with Bill and Hillary Clinton. The idea was to have universal health care, and then it got whittled down to what we now call Hillary care. This idea of healthcare reform was shot down in the U.S. Senate by a coalition that was led by Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, he of the Moynihan Report during the Nixon years, that essentially like pathologized Black people as being matriarchal, and therefore Black boys would never have a chance at life because all the fathers were out of the family. But that's besides the point. So Daniel Patrick Moynihan leads this coalition against healthcare reform, shoots it dead. Hillary care, gone, right? But every time the Democrats have had a Senate majority and a House majority, control of the executive office, this always fucking happens, that there's a Democrat or two that leads a coalition or is able to stand in the way of bills passing on their own. So this time around, it's Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. Right. But then last time around, it's Joe Lieberman and Ben Nelson, right? Prior to that, it's Daniel Patrick Moynihan. So like you tell me, is it more likely that people who represent, these are entirely different states. Like Ben Nelson represented Nebraska. Joe Lieberman represented Connecticut. Is it likely that people who represent completely different geographies of the United States suddenly got it in their minds like, my constituents are not going to like me supporting this progressive bill that I've been championing for my entire career? Is that the likely outcome? Like, is that do you think that that's possible, that suddenly like the geography, the political will so wildly swings across the US geography that it lands upon somebody like Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema to stop progressive legislation from passing? Is that the likely cause? Or is it that there is a designated role for one or two Democrats in every single majority Senate where it's their responsibility to block progressive legislation because none of these people wanted that progressive legislation to pass in the first place? They can talk about how much they wanted the legislation to pass. We wanted to pass healthcare with a public option. We really, really wanted to do it. But Lieberman and Nelson, what are you going to do? We really, really wanted to pass a stimulus package, but Manchin and Sinema, unfortunately got us to go down from our 2,000 to our 1,400 to 750 or whatever the fuck. Like, there is a designated villain for every Democrat-controlled House and Senate. They just happen to be them this time around. So it's not that one person or those two people.
Just to finish that thought, and I want to ask you one last question. Basically, I just wanted to say that, like, even if she had said something to the effect of like, Manchin seems to really want to know how to pay for the the package. Well, like, I have an idea. And like, that's her dress basically. And I thought that could at least, like, even at the very least, that could be a statement.
Well, what's going to happen is, because Joe Biden has already indicated that he wants to increase taxes on the quote unquote wealthy. We still don't know what that means, but he says he wants to increase taxes on the wealthy. He said this during his campaign. He's said this early on in his presidency, that taxes on the wealthy should go up. And you know what's going to happen? It's going to pass the House because AOC did introduce a bill to increase taxes on the wealthy. Probably going to pass the House. It's going to hit the Senate, and Manchin and Sinema are going to stand in front of it and shoot it down. And it's going to be another, what are you going to do, right? Blue dog Democrats.
You said that you're tiring of like the Twitter discourse, etc., which is like, and also you're talking about how like you're not feeling all that about like writing and the writing output that you don't feel as compelled to do anymore, or at least not as much as you used to. So what's the way forward for you, or like what do you think in this climate, especially like as the dust seems to settle and like everybody seems to be like holding on to their identities and like put the chips down and like take the money out of the casino and just like take theirs and so on. Like, is that going to be the general trend, or like is there any sort of like possibility of like a more collective struggle? And what do you you have like a pretty significant following, and like you have a voice, and like you have pretty strong
at some point people are going to find out. I say this often: everybody wants a seat at the table until you figure out who's on the menu. Right? Everybody wants to be a part of the ruling class. Everybody wants to be on the winning team. And then at some point you realize you and your people are on the menu. So this idea of like representational politics is, to me, a death trap. Like the idea that representation within the halls of power, like, or maybe this is a better way to put it. The idea that marginalization is going to be solved by having people who represent you and your identity within the halls of power is a death trap, because you're setting up people of your own political interests and your own class interests to turn against you. You're basically sending them in there to become lion fodder or to become one of the lions. And not only are you doing that, you're enabling the ruling class to say, oh, this is in their interest. Look at the person that we brought up from the working class. Look at the Black person that we brought in. Look at the trans person that we brought in. Look at the Latino person that we brought in. Like look at this. This person has all of the right politics. They're progressive. They antagonize the right people. The right wing hates them. They have every box is checked. They have all of the bona fides, and they're still not good enough for you. What's wrong with you? You're deliberately setting up the outcome that you're going to allow somebody that comes from the same type of identity and class interests as you to undermine your own position. And that's why I say identity politics is a death trap. Representational politics is a death trap. And it happens via what people claim to be identity politics, which I don't believe is true. But it is a form of like popular identity politics in the sense that simply sharing the same identity as you means that they have the same political interests. And that's absolutely not true.
I feel like if you participated in the new Priyanka Chopra Usher contest, you would win. So I don't know if you're considering doing that, because you're pretty good at social media and like you're a coder and all of that. So,
oh my God, if I was ever to end up on an activist idol, just end my life. Okay, I give permission to any of the people who follow me and those who are my closest family. Just put a pillow over my face and smother me until I stop struggling. Okay.
Do you think you can infiltrate there and get out of it on top? Like win over those people and like reform the world?
No. The only reason that I'd ever go there is to tell them they're full of shit. The only reason that I would ever in a non-hostile manner be in front of Priyanka Chopra is to tell her that she's a fascist to her face. That's it.